Afternoon and evening. We are ready to jump back in for the day. So we're all here together this morning to hear from Spencer Barr from ICF. Heather, do you have the slides up? If you want to throw up slide 23 real quick. So I know briefly we talked yesterday, and I'm sure Heather did too, about ICF, which is our partner, and they help us evaluate the effectiveness of this program. I feel like teachers get a little worried and antsy about this, and this really isn't a big deal. So definitely don't start stressing out about it. But there are a couple of parameters around ICF, and Spencer today is kind of going to help us walk through what that looks like. And we know that Spencer already sent us the pre-survey, and he's kind of walk through some of these bullets and expectations from ICF as we move throughout the cohort. So Spencer, I'm just going to turn it over to you.
Sounds good. Thanks, Christy. Well, good morning and welcome everybody. I'm excited to have the chance to speak with you all and introduce a little bit of the work that we're doing. As Christy mentioned, ICF is an independent research and consulting firm, and we are currently in the third iteration of this evaluation of MEEP. We've been working with Patel for the last couple of years, and I had the pleasure of finishing up the survey and all the instruments and all the data collection analysis for the program for last year, and it was really great to work with everybody and go through all of that data. As she mentioned, we do have a couple of moving parts throughout the coming school year, the beginning of the school year at least. You've already done the first part of that. That's the teacher pre-survey, which congratulations, you guys have almost all already completed it. There's a few stragglers, I believe, since I last checked. So don't be that one last person that hasn't filled it out, but you guys are making my job really easy, so I appreciate that. That teacher survey will also have a second component, which would be a post survey. It's the same deal, a lot of similar questions, just to give us an idea of kind of where you're at with your understanding and your perspective before the program and then after the program. Again, with that survey and with everything else that we're doing as part of the evaluation, this data has no bearing on you or your process, progress rather, or anything tied to you specifically. There won't be any grade or any marking that's allocated to any specific teacher or group of teachers. So be honest, be truthfully forward with it. We want to hear what you have to say. It's really an evaluation of the program rather than you yourselves. So that post survey will come after most of the program has been completed, closer to the end of this year, and we'll give you more information as that comes through. But again, very similar to the first one. It won't take very long, and it'll be the same format, so you already know how to do that. The second chunk of it will be a very similar survey that we're sending out to your students, those students that are a part of your class, that will participate in the lesson plans that you put together. There will be a pre-survey for them to kind of gauge where they're at before most of that programming takes place, and then as well a post survey afterwards to see if their interests in manufacturing and engineering, as well as their knowledge of different principles has changed through the course of the program. We do only survey students that are from 4th to 12th grade. We don't go through with the littles, just for data protection and data accuracy reasons. It doesn't make much sense to put 3rd graders or 2nd graders through a survey like that. But it is online. It's again very similar to the one that you took, and we'll give some more direction as to best practices for going through that with your students, and making sure that they're able to go through that kind of usually all together in a classroom setting. Just takes a couple of minutes, but again, we'll give more information for that as that time draws a little closer. The next part, and the part that I'm really excited about going through this year, is we're also going to conduct some site visits. We'll have the opportunity to come out and visit a handful of schools at random. We'll reach out, we'll let you know who you are as the year progresses, but that will be a chance for us to come and see your lesson plans in action, your MEEP plan that you put together after your externship. Once you've had the chance to plan that, we'll come and observe you actually teaching your kids, going through whatever lesson plan, whatever problem-based learning based class that you do that day. We'll also have the chance to interview you, hopefully do a focus group with some students, and generally just get a feel for how you're doing, how everything is going. Again, it's not an evaluation of you. We won't be, passing along a grade to anybody at the program or elsewhere. It's really just to get a little deeper data, a little more context into what you guys are doing, so we can pass that along to Patel and let them know how things are going in that regard. And then at the end, we already mentioned the teacher post survey. Student post survey will be done generally at that time. And then after that, we take all the data, we process it, and we'll end up writing up a report that will generally just go to the folks at Patel. There is a chance that they could share that if they want, but it's not going to be something that you could just go find on the internet. It's not going to be publicly consumable, and none of your names or personal information will be associated with anything that we produce in that regard. So that's generally everything. Like I said, I've had the chance to go through the data for the last year. I didn't get the chance to do the site visits. A colleague of mine did those last year, but I am really excited to come out and see the great work that you guys are doing. It seems from the data that the program does make some great impacts, both for teachers and for students. And I'm excited for this next iteration of it. That's pretty much anything that I had. Christy, I don't know if we have any other topics or questions that you wanted me to address, but that's my spiel.
Well, I think it's a good opportunity to teachers be able to ask questions while you're here, and you can answer kind of firsthand what those questions may be. Typically, the site visits, again, like you said, are chosen at random, which is why as we move forward through the program, we do ask you to choose a week of implementation. That way we can line it up with Spencer's schedule. So that, if Spencer wants to go to Murfreesboro, then, I have a teacher that's implementing this week and Spencer can go that week. So that's why we do ask as time gets closer and we start really digging into planning PBLs that we do pick an implementation window. But I'll just open it up to the floor. If you have a question, definitely feel free to come off of mute. Again, this student surveys are not taken in grades 3 and below. And the parent consent forms that go home, those, if they come back and they're signed, that's the surveys that you don't give. So basically, if you send home the parent consent form and it doesn't come back, then the child is free to take the survey. So that's kind of how it's written. It's written for the parent to sign saying they don't want the student to take it. So if you do get that form back and it's signed, then that student won't take the survey. If you have a question, feel free to come off.
I just have a quick question, and it might not be super relevant, but is the pre and post survey, is that specific to, is it similar to sort of the survey questions that we responded to, where it's focused on manufacturing? Or is it more general, where it's focused on like project-based learning and the design process and things like that?
That's a good question. So the survey that you already took is the pre-survey. So that's what will be the baseline for measuring the impacts. The post-survey will be very similar. A lot of the same questions, mostly the same questions actually, just to gauge that impact, but also some sort of open-ended after the program. What did you think? What changes? Goods, bads, those sorts of things. So it will be, essentially the same topics that you've already answered on the pre-survey. Good question.
I'm sorry, I should have clarified it. I meant for the survey for the students.
Oh, for the students. Yes, it is for them. It's more, rather than focusing on their knowledge of, problem-based learning, because they're not really aware of that kind of side of it. The student survey is focused generally on their interest in manufacturing, engineering topics, kind of career outlooks, plans for future education. But they also have kind of that knowledge section, the true false section, where we'll be able to gauge on their end kind of what they understand and where they end up in terms of the change in understanding for them.
Great, thank you.
No problem. Any other questions?
So Spencer did congratulate us on a high rate of completion for the pre-surveys. However, there are still a few that we have yet to receive. Those were posted in Slack yesterday. So the link is in Slack. And if you know you haven't done a pre-survey, please go find that link on Slack and complete it today.
And if you do have any questions about completing the survey, if you think you've already done it, but you want to double check, you can also feel free to reach out to me directly. My email is spencer.barr@icf.com. So pretty much everything that's my name under my face right now is my email. But yeah, feel free to reach out, or throughout the process, if you have other questions, I am available. I'm the point of contact for you guys. And if you have a question that you think relates directly to something that I'm doing, feel free to reach out if you don't want to talk to Christy or Heather, but they're great. So don't feel bad about reaching out to them either.
Great. Well, I'm sure questions will pop up as time goes on. So definitely feel free to reach out to Spencer directly or reach out to Heather or myself as we move forward into collecting some of this data for our program. If there are no other questions, then we will go ahead and split out. So Spencer, thank you for your time. And we will see you at our next check-in.
Pleasure to meet you all. Have a good day.
Bye, Spencer. Thank you.
Bye.
Please remember, if you're in 101, you stay in this section. And if you're going to 201, you go to the other link.
Yep, and I'm about to throw it in the chat for 201 people in case you don't have it pulled up. All right, Heather, let me make you the official host.
Dun, dun, dun. Thank you.
All right, catch you later.
Bye. Have fun, guys.
See ya.
Hi, everybody. I'm glad to see you all back. That means that we didn't scare you too much anyway. I think a bunch of people left. Oh no, we still have 28. That's good. Teresa, can we talk about your change name thing? Because I'm dying and I couldn't stop laughing.
My name said name change. I just think it's left over from teaching people how to change it.
Yes.
Like, here's how you change your name. Click on this, go here. And I just didn't even notice. I logged in with a different computer today. So
I asked everybody to change their name and put their state. So if you haven't done that yet, or if you don't know how to do that, you can right click on your picture, and at the bottom of the menu there, it'll say rename. And then a little thing will say enter a new name below. So please put your name and change, and then put your state initials after that, so we can remind one another about where we are. I know that in corporate America, lots of meetings, people ask you to put your pronouns in, which I think is a nice thing to do when we're on Zoom and not really able to discern that from a distance. And you can also put all kinds of things. Has anybody been punked on Zoom by their kids, like doing stuff like that? I was very entertained by all the memes about all the kids that changed their name to Reconnecting. And
Can you repeat how to do that again? I'm not being able to get that done.
Absolutely, Cheryl. You're going to hover over your own square.
Okay.
Then there's going to be, if you right click.
Oh, right click. Okay.
And then a new window pops up, mute my audio, stop video, blah, blah, blah. At the very bottom, it'll say rename.
Okay. I'm
not getting that either. I'm trying.
Okay. What if you click the three dots next to in the right corner? So if you hover over your own square, you'll have three dots. It'll be mute and then three dots.
All I have is a pen.
No,
Are
I'm
you
not.
guys using Chromebook?
Yes.
Okay, so what I had to do is I clicked on participants at the bottom, and then I clicked my name or I
There
hovered
it
over
is.
my name, and it allowed me to rename it.
Thank you.
Thank you for that alternate approach. All right, while you're doing that, let's talk about what happened yesterday. How did it go? How long did it wind up taking people to work through the modules? We said that we would check in on that today. Did anybody pay attention?
I think I spent like 3 hours or something.
And in that 3
well,
hours,
but
what all
then
did
it
you
was
work
like
on?
I just sort of kept going, and then I looked up and I was like, oh, I got 3 modules done. So, and I did it though, knowing that I was getting a little bit ahead and thinking that like some of like the Google forms and things like that, like I might go back and add to it and things like that. So I did sort of a fast version, knowing that as we have the classes, I might like add additional things to some of the work. But like as far as just busting through, it's not like it's hard. Yeah.
So it sounds like you did 3 modules in roughly 3 hours. Okay.
I did the same thing. I worked ahead as well. I think I'm on the 4th module. I just have to do the taking the scenarios and making the PBL. And I'm just working on that, but it didn't take too long. I did have an issue though with like in some of the modules, like I know like the first module, it didn't put a check mark beside everything. So I had to go back and rewatch the video. Like, I mean, on the first module, I think I had to rewatch some of the videos like 3 times before it actually gave me the check mark. And I'm like, I'm watching all these videos, so it wasn't giving me the check marks. And I had to go through multiple times. I'm like, I did feel like part of it, I was just like, I don't know if I'm doing something wrong, but I went through and I did everything. And then finally, last time I had to do the videos again and click the link for the Padlet and do it again. Like it was just like some of them were very redundant. If for some reason it wasn't like tracking all of my projects. So
and I didn't actually notice that it was doing check marks for those things. I thought the check marks were just for the questions. So
no, it's like for all of them.
I have to go back and look.
Yeah, it would have like a check mark for a lot of mine, but then there'd be like of the modules, there's 3 sections. One of the section it wouldn't have the check mark. So I had to just keep going through it. I mean, that one I went through like 3 or 4 times. That was my only issue. I don't know if anyone else experienced.
That's a significant issue. So thank you for doing that.
Yeah.
If you do something and you know you did it, right? Please don't waste your time watching those videos 90 times. Like I
will say, I put it on mute.
You're forgiven. You're fine. There are some things that I can do in the back end. It just takes a long time to like go through. There's not the grade book on the back end of this LMS is terrible. And so you have to go through each person. It doesn't give you like a big grid to do it on. It's annoying. I'm happy to do it, of course, if need be. But if you do it and you give it a go and you know you've gotten to the end and you know you've checked through the little assessment at the very end. Oh, Terry Reeves said, I let the video run all the way through and it didn't close it out until it went to the next video. I wonder if there's like some little quirky bug at the back of it. Obviously, please like honor systems, do the stuff, but also don't waste your precious life energy about green check marks. We'll get there. Okay. Cool. Did everyone successfully get into edX? Is there anybody, I'll ask it a different way. Is there anybody here that was not able to get into edX yesterday? That's amazing. Thank you so much. I have to say, we finished class yesterday, ate a little bit of lunch, and then spent the whole rest of the day writing and checking on things. And so there are a couple of things that I want to make sure everyone knows about. So last year we didn't use Slack. And this year we decided let's add Slack to give you a place and give us a place to respond in real time to questions. And so yesterday I went ahead and responded to the Q&A questions that you guys had on your exit ticket. I put those answers in Slack. So please know that, you know, living in the design cycle, I'm probably going to use Slack for a bunch of things. So it looks like most of you are in there. If you haven't been in there, if you hadn't logged into Slack by the time I was doing Slack stuff yesterday, I sent you a special email, separate email with the link. So please log into Slack. I did answer the questions in Slack, and so we'll go through those there. Someone asked, will surveys be tailored to student grade or reading levels? And the answer is no. Spencer just talked about that. If you're teaching kiddos between kindergarten and third grade, you're not going to have to worry about student surveys at all. You'll just skip that piece because of reading levels, because of technology issues, because of 1,000 different reasons. The other question that people said was, how long should our PBL be? Hang on one sec. Kristen's messaging me about something. Okay. So when we think about PBL, we're looking for sustained inquiry. We're not looking for one period of class. So I'd say, you know, 4 or 5 days, and it doesn't have to be the only thing that you do. There's opportunities to do a little bit and then come back to it, do a little bit more and come back to it. You want it to be sort of like an iterative process where the kids delve into the information over a period of time and have a little bit of sustained exploration around that topic. And then someone asked, in the end, are we planning to develop a project or problem-based PBL? Can we do either? So we're shooting for problem-based. Sometimes people wind up thinking that they did something that was problem-based and it wound up being project-based. Like, as you're designing, let's shoot for problem-based, okay, as best we can, and try to use those gold standards as the guide, excuse me, to get there. So were there any other questions that came along as you were exploring what you were working on last night?
I have a quick question, but it's over the Slack.
Okay.
So my name changed and I emailed someone, I don't know.
Me.
Okay. So most of the information's coming through from my old email, which is fine. And then they asked me for my updated name and new email, but everything's still coming to my old email, which is great. But then the new email, you sent me the Slack information to my new email, but I already registered under my old email. So
I don't think it matters. I imagine that on the back end, your old email and your new email are always going to go to you.
Okay, that's fine. No, I just letting you know, like, I did register, but I did get an email from you to join.
Oh, I'm still remembering that, Casey.
Okay, no, that
Like,
is fine. I was just like, I did it. I just want to make sure that you knew that I am on the Slack. But then I do remember too, you said on the Slack there would be a group for like Ohio versus Tennessee.
Mm-hmm.
And right now, the only channel I see is the general PBI or PBL resources and then random.
Okay.
I tried to search the Ohio channel, but it doesn't have any. The only ones are those 3. I don't know if anyone else is seeing that as well.
It's invite only. There's nothing in there yet.
Okay.
I tried to add all of the people and my computer went.
Yeah, that's fine. I was just double checking that.
Yeah. And you know, really, I don't even know that the Ohio teachers only, after, you know, living in the design cycle, like, how are we going to do this? We didn't have that 101 week 1 chat yesterday. And I was like, I want to be able to talk to all these people in one spot. It doesn't really matter if it's Ohio versus Tennessee. the place where that Ohio versus Tennessee conversation comes into play is people are having some sort of issue around their externship,
Right.
which probably you'd email Kristen anyhow.
Yeah.
So
okay. That's
that
fine.
might be something that we wind up not using.
I'm fine with that. I was just checking.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And it's certainly a function of making it up as we go along for, with regard to the Slack. Okay, so
I have
here's
a
the thing.
question too.
Yes.
Okay, so they talked about a site visit, and I understand that's not going to be like an evaluation for me personally, like with my school. But in Ohio, we have like the OTES rubric. Do they have a rubric that we could look at that they follow, just so I kind of understand what they would be looking for in this PBL lesson plan?
Yes, probably. I will talk to Spencer. That's a really good point. I will talk to Spencer and ask him what he has to say about that. I don't think, I read the report that they wrote from last time, and really they came to see, are people doing PBL? Are people and then they talk to kids and they talk to you. So
Okay.
I'll make a note to write to Spencer about if there's a rubric. And I think a rubric for site visits. I think they only pick, a handful of people, right?
Okay.
And I'm pretty sure last year, we had a different evaluator last year who came. I think he talked to everybody before he came and said, hey, this is what it's going to be like. And so I think that if you were selected, that would be the point at which we could ask some deeper questions about what's it look like.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
Okay. We have to do a piece of housekeeping. Okay. A lot of the people who have agreed to host teachers for site visits were like, what's my liability? What's going on? So we worked with Battelle Legal to create a waiver. And the waiver says, that the employer is not going to be held liable, that the teacher is going to be, responsible for their behavior on site. So I have a waiver. The Tennessee folks were sent this waiver by Kristen previously. So if you completed the waiver, if you're a Tennessee person, don't do this. Hold tight for a second. If you're a Tennessee person who hasn't completed the waiver, you're going to click on this link and do it right now. There's the Tennessee waiver. If you're an Ohio person and you haven't completed the waiver because you haven't seen it yet, please click on that link and do it right now. It should take about 2 minutes. And while folks are doing that, we'll take any other questions that you guys have.
I have a quick question about the externship.
Yeah, you got it.
What is it that we are going to be doing during those 2 days?
It's a really good question. So it's an opportunity for experiential learning for you, right? It's a chance for you to take this stuff that you're learning in theory through your Manufacturing 101 course and to understand it in your body in a boots on the ground sort of way. So most site visits start with a tour or a little understanding of this is what we do. You should have an opportunity to observe different people doing their jobs. And also one of the benefits of the site visit in my mind is an opportunity to really understand firsthand that manufacturing is not dirty, dark, and dangerous. So to start to dispel the myths, but then also start to think about, oh yeah, there's an HR guy here. Oh yeah, there's a safety lady here. And to really start to understand that just because you work in a manufacturing plant, AKA what we used to call a factory, doesn't mean that the only possibility for your life is standing next to a machine doing the same thing over and over and over again. that to me is the really big value. I had the opportunity to visit the Toyota plant near Murfreesboro, and was just shocked at all of the coding that goes into it, all of the critical thinking that goes into it, all the project management, all the problem solving. And so while you're on your externship visit, one of the things that I would be prepared to ask your employer is, what problems do you observe on a regular basis, right? And they'll probably talk about problems that relate to staffing and people calling off, but they'll also talk about, whoa, we realized that the paint was chipping off and we had to come up with a new solution about how to apply this paint. And we had to modify our process this way. Another question that you could ask is, how has automation changed the way that you do your work? Another question you could ask is, what is something that you're doing now that you didn't do 5 years ago? And why did that change occur, right? What are we doing now that we didn't do 5 years ago? We used to do this PBL training in person for 3 days. So everybody and their brother used to have to travel to either Tennessee or Columbus. We actually never did it in Columbus because of the pandemic, but there's so many things. This morning I woke up and I was thinking that I was going to my office, and I didn't want to because I'm going to be on Zoom all day. That's not something that would have been a choice for me 5 years ago. So really think about the ways in which business has evolved. You can also talk about, do you guys discreetly talk about the engineering design process? And who does that? How do your people collaborate? I think that there are a million questions that you can ask. And I think one of the things that you want to do is really just pay attention. You could even make a list while you're there about all the number of different job titles that you hear, and then ask your externship host, what are the qualifications for these people? What's the education that most people get in order to start out in this position? What would you suggest that my students study in order to be able to consider this as a job? What is the path forward? So if this is an entry-level position, how long does it take to someone to advance to a place where they're mid-level or manager in this role? So, I think one of the things too is this idea that manufacturing jobs are not dead-end jobs, that they are paths to prosperity for lots and lots of people. And, the song for a really long time at most colleges or most schools has been like, everybody needs to go to college. College is the most important thing in the world. And I think more and more and more, we're getting to the point where we're like, wait a minute, we can do externships, we can do apprenticeships, we can do experiential learning, we can send kids to career tech centers, we can do some stackable credentials, we can do all kinds of things to give students an opportunity for some experiential learning before they decide, I'm going to go to this college and major in who knows what. So those are some thoughts. Has anybody been on some kind of site visit or industry tour? And do you have any comments about that? All right, I'm going to tell you a story really quick. Oh, go ahead.
Before COVID, we actually had a day where we took 6th, 7th, and 8th graders and did a tour and showed them. And our plan was to do that, a different manufacturing facility every year for 3-year rotation, so that they would see 3 different types of manufacturing. But then post-COVID, we've not started that back up again.
Right.
But it was very interesting.
What about it was interesting, Brenda?
I had the idea that I guess kind of an archaic idea of what it would be like. But to see the technology, to see how streamlined it was and the different things that everybody was working on, it was eye-opening for me as an educator, and I think an eye-opening experience for the kids.
Mm-hmm. We work a lot with Honda because it's in Marysville, Ohio, which is only about 20 miles from Columbus. And one of my contacts over there who I work with all the time, who's just retiring from Honda, his whole job was to do community engagement. So he spent his whole career, well, first of all, he was an engineer for a really long time, but by the time he got right before retirement for the last 5 years, was to do community outreach and talk to schools to help recruit students. And so really, you never know what kind of opportunities are available. And so when you think like on its face, like, oh, this is manufacturing, but in reality, there's potentially, you know, 100 different jobs that you never thought of. A couple of months ago, we took a group of teachers to this place called Vitacraft. Vitacraft makes pet food for like rabbits and birds, small animal pet food. And when you pull up, there's like a whole bunch of like big, giant industrial silos with all these tubes and pipes. And it's got a bunch of grain in it. And then they go underneath it with these, you know, buckets, but these big containers, and like pull like the different mixtures of stuff. And then they go somewhere and mix it up. So we did a tour with a bunch of teachers. We all had to wear like these like head to toe suits because it was, you know, food grade, and they needed to make sure that we weren't getting our, you know, hair and stuff on them. And so we're walking around, and the head of industrial maintenance was with us. I mean, this man understood how every machine in that factory worked. He understood, you know, what different things did, and was responsible for keeping all the stuff moving, because if your machines break, you can't produce, and you can't produce, you can't make any money, and you've got staff standing around not doing anything. So I asked him, I said, hey, when I used to wait tables, I used to have this recurring nightmare about having to carry like these giant trays up these steps, and I could never get to all the people and feed them. Like, do you have a recurring work nightmare? And he's like, oh yeah. I said, what is it? He's like, I dream all the time that I show up here and this place is filled with rabbits, giant rabbits who are eating all the food. And I was like, oh, that's a good work nightmare. So, I mean, you can ask someone what their work nightmare is and really like get a feel for what it must be like to work there. All kinds of questions are possible, I think. I thought that was really funny. And I thought that it was a really good answer to that question. Let's shift a little bit and do some reviewing about the stuff we talked about last night. Yesterday, one of the themes in Module 1 was experiential learning. And so I want to talk a little bit about, why do we care about experiential learning? Like, why were we even talking about experiential learning when we're talking about PBL?
I think the big thing we talked yesterday, we need more people in the workforce that are more hands-on learners. And I think by giving them experiences of things that they're going to do in the real world, it's preparing them ultimately for that next step. And as you mentioned, not everyone's going to go to college, and where we live up here in Northwest Ohio, you can see that. So giving them a hands-on experience and experiencing those things is definitely going to help them in the long run.
Absolutely. How does experiential learning impact understanding?
It allows students to understand their way. It allows them to retain it better because they understand it's their own way.
Mm-hmm. How does experiential learning impact your understanding of stuff?
I loved from one of the videos from the modules yesterday, and I don't remember which module because I was like these other people. I worked ahead, and I finished like third one and didn't realize I was even on the third one. But anyway, the little boy that said, I used to be taught stuff by my teacher. Now I'm learning it myself. I'm figuring it out myself. And that was the most powerful quote for me. Was he said, man, you know, my teacher used to be the know-it-all. Now I'm the know-it-all. And I love that.
Absolutely.
I think one of the things with experiential learning is, just like with teaching, that's the point at which you understand what it is you understand and what it is you don't understand. You know, at that point, you realize, oh, I need to go back because I didn't catch that the first time. I didn't get what was going on. So I think that's one of the good things about experiential learning.
Does anybody ever paint in their house, like their walls, or put up wallpaper? And like, you know, theoretically, like you get a paint roller, you patch up the walls, and then you paint. But before you do it, I feel like I have an experiential learning crisis every time I try to paint. I'm always like, geez, it's so hard. Why do I think you could just walk in and do it? Then you got to tape, and then you got to trim, and then you got to, right? So then you realize, oh, my technique about this is terrible, right? I have to do a better job of edging. I have to do a better job of covering up the floors. So watching someone do something is very, very different than doing something in your body. And you can totally understand the theory about how a thing is supposed to go. But until you do it in your own body, I think that's where you begin to develop true understanding of a thing. And, you know, a lot of what we do in school is theoretical, and then we give kids homework and assignments so that they can have some experiential understanding. But a lot of times we don't provide context outside of that particular experience to help really like help them synthesize that information, right? So I always use this example about percentages. Like percentages didn't make sense to me for a really long time. I've always been a terrible math student. Didn't understand percentages. I didn't understand how like the whole related to the parts. And it wasn't until I was shopping. My mom's a big shopper. And she'd be like, you're not getting this thing unless you tell me how much it costs with the sale price, right? And so then I learned how to take like something's 20% off and what's 10%, add 10% and 10%. Now I know, now subtract that from the total, that's how much it costs. Let me tell you, after being forced to have that experience, I really understood percentages and why they mattered. But when I was calculating them 1,000 times on the worksheet that my teachers gave me, it never made sense to me. Can anybody think of something that they have learned ever that like you thought you got it, but then when you did it, that changed to like, oh my gosh, I didn't know what I didn't know, and now I know?
I don't know if this fits in with what you're saying. I remember from one of the videos, and I don't remember the module either, but they were, I think it was the one they were doing the robots and the ping pong balls or something. But the one girl, it hit on me because I think she was like an 8th grader, and that's what I teach. And she's like, I'll never be able to do that. You know, they had to program or do something. And I think her group actually ended up winning it, I think. But I see that a lot with my students, you know, until they actually dive into it, it seems impossible. And I have some videos that I show them, and basically as long as they think it's impossible, that's how long it'll be that it will be impossible until they start actually doing it. Then they find out I can actually do this, you know, and usually it's taking baby steps and breaking it down into smaller segments and stuff like that. But I see that an awful lot with my 8th graders.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. Thanks so much, Dave. Any other reflections on how you either have like learned something about yourself by experiencing something versus reading it, or places where you see your kids do that?
For myself, I think about anytime we get a new program, an LMS or a new, you know, teacher portal, they can talk to me about it all day long. I can read about it, but until I get in there, I really don't understand how it works.
Yeah, tech is a really good example of that. Some people just really like, they have to play with it and touch it in order for it to work.
You know, I think like I work, you know, at a vocational career tech school, and I've always noticed that our kids, they are not typically the types that just want to sit and listen to you and take in information. And so, and it's gotten like more and more so to where like I'm up in the front of the room and I limit, as you know, as much as possible the time in front of the room to just get the kids moving and doing what they need to do, because that's when they pay attention and are learning and ask questions and figure it out. So this is like just takes that up to that next level, really. Getting them all doing that, which I already know is how they learn and how they like to learn and how they engage, and like forcing myself to help them do it even more and on their own and self-initiated and driven.
Absolutely. Thanks, Teresa. All right. So for the rest of today, we're going to talk a little bit about engineering design process, design thinking, think about ways to incorporate that. And also think a little bit about how you can shift your classroom culture to one that helps students become problem solvers and innovators, where there's a level of safety around not getting it right the first time. So a lot of times, before I did my STEMX job, I was the director of the Ohio STEM Learning Network. In Ohio, we have this thing called the Quality Model for STEM and STEAM Schools. And it's this big long document that talks about like what are the specific characteristics of a STEM or STEAM school. And it maps to the designation process, and you have to have all these things in order to become STEM designated. I've read that document 1,000 times, and as far as experiential learning, it wasn't until I started having to present about that I came up with like a new framework for how to explain like the qualities of a STEM designated school. And I was thinking about that as we were talking about experiential learning and PBL, because I think it fits in. And so I'm going to share this with you now. And this is like supposed to be what is good for a good STEM school. But for me, I also think that this is what are the ingredients that we need or why we would do PBL. Can you guys see my screen? Cool. So yesterday we talked about culture, and we talked about culture is what you expect and accept from one another. Remember that? So if we're creating situations where we want kids to learn in their bodies, we have to create opportunities to expect that you're going to be innovators, you're going to be problem solvers, you're going to be entrepreneurs, you're going to have some strong habits of mind where you're an effective communicator and a good collaborator, and you build these habits that you want these kids to be able to identify with. Sometimes we call those habits 21st century skills. Sometimes we call those habits, soft skills, but really we want kids to be able to value communication, critical thinking, problem solving, and then also have them understand, what it means to have a growth mindset. So if you create a culture that expects and accepts growth mindset, people aren't going to freak out when they fail. We're going to talk about failure as a first attempt at learning instead of, oh my gosh, go to the corner, you're grounded because you failed, right? Then we think about curriculum. And when we create PBLs, we want to think about, okay, yeah, there's standards. We have to talk about our standards, but how can we talk about standards in a way that's authentic and relevant and is going to make sense to them? So we can get to the point where we get to the connections piece. And I think that the way that we connect the curriculum to the community is by creating context for classroom learning by looking outside of the classroom. So if we think about roofing, I need a new roof on my garage. How do you calculate how much roof tile you're going to need and how much it's going to cost, and why does area matter? And what happens if you change the cost per square foot in terms of how much it's going to cost you to do this? Then we have to add in labor and all that stuff. Or going back to our example about manufacturing, if someone needs to produce roof tiles, for example, whose job is that? How do they figure out what the market demand is for that? How do they get transported from Columbus, Ohio or from the warehouse to Columbus, Ohio? Like all of those things. And so that's the reason why we talk about work-based learning, field experience, career awareness. And all of these are the reasons that we do PBL, because PBL allows us to accomplish creating a culture of innovation and problem solving, creating connections to the community to provide context for classroom learning. It gives us the chance to go, when am I ever going to use this anyway? We'll be able to show them, right? So I don't know if that graphic is helpful. It's one of my most favorite things to really just like outline, like what are the most important things and why do they matter? And these are the things that I try to keep in mind when we talk about why STEM all the time. Thoughts or reflections about that? Donna, are you trying to tell us something? Okay. Awesome. Tonight in your modules, we're going to talk about, or this afternoon, project versus problem. And a lot of you reflected yesterday about how you thought that that was a good conversation. Does anybody have any additional thoughts or examples about the difference between problem versus project?
I like to think as problem being open-ended rather than the project being a specific thing that they're working towards.
All right. I'm going to give you an analogy that I came up with the other day. And I want you guys to tell me if you think that this analogy holds water. Okay. So has anyone ever done like a meal prep kit like HelloFresh or a number of one of those like meal prep kits? So for those of you who have not, the company sends you everything in a little box. If you need salt and pepper in this recipe, they send you a tiny little envelope of salt and pepper. If you need Parmesan cheese, they send you a little thing. If you need Tabasco sauce, they send you the tiniest, teeniest little Tabasco sauce ever and put it in there. I quit using HelloFresh because there was so much trash, I couldn't deal. However, it's really fun if you're a brand new person learning how to cook because they give you everything you need. They give you step-by-step directions. And then at the end, you have this thing that you made all by yourself. Then there's this other piece. And I think that HelloFresh is a really good example of project-based learning most of the time. Then there's that show Chopped. What do they do on Chopped? Anybody seen it? Go ahead, Rob.
Go ahead.
Oh, they basically give them a handful of ingredients and tell them to make something.
Anything. Solve the problem. The problem that they present is make food. Solve the problem. Here are the ingredients and you make food. So do you guys think that this is like an analogy that holds water in terms of defining or differentiating between problem versus project? Okay. Thank you for helping me run a field test on that. We will maybe use that in the future. Okay. Tonight for your homework, you're going to talk about PBL. And has anyone ever taken any training from the Buck Institute, now known as PBL Works? Like, has anyone ever been formally trained in PBL? Okay. There's this organization called PBL Works. They used to be the Buck Institute. And for a long time, they were running around training people on PBL. And you can go to, I think it's pblworks.com or pblworks.org. They've got a lot of really great resources around PBL and around sort of the structure for PBL. And you'll learn about this in your lesson tonight. But this is the framework for PBL. And this is not the only framework, but this is a really solid like way to remember the elements that are supposed to be included in your PBL unit, right? So first you have to come up with a challenging, meaningful, open-ended question. Opportunity for sustained inquiry. So like, how do we understand the problem? Who is affected by this problem? How big is the problem? All of those things. Find some resource about the problem, maybe identify some experts who can help you with the problem. And that gets into authenticity when you start to think about who's impacted by this problem. You know, if we're thinking about water quality in your school, where we had some teachers do PBL at their school where they had a stream and they knew that the stream was dirty outside of their school, and they started to explore what behaviors is the school doing to contribute to that stream being really dirty. And so they went out and they tested the quality of the water, and then they looked at, you know, what's draining from around the area to figure out, is there anything or any chemicals that they're using at the school that could be getting into the stream? And then start to think about, okay, how might we improve the quality of this stream? Are there other plants that we can plant around the stream? Are there things that we can do to, you know, eliminate runoff from the asphalt in the parking lot? What can we do to help improve the health of this stream. And then the kids came up with, okay, this is the best solution, and then made a presentation about it. Students get to decide to a certain extent. Does that mean that you're going to let them completely run amok? Absolutely not. You're still the adult in the room. You still have to create guardrails. You still have to help them kind of move forward. An opportunity for students to reflect, and we reflect naturally when we're using the engineering design process. And so give students a chance to say, oh, wow, you know, I liked it when we looked at this. I didn't think it was helpful when we looked at that. Opportunity to critique and revise. So before students go and give their big presentations out to a public audience, have them present to a small group in advance so that they can get some feedback and make some modifications on their design. And then the really big piece is the public product. So I want to talk for a minute about when you guys, or if you have done PBLs in your classroom already, do you tend to have, you know, a demonstration of student learning? And what have you done in the past to give students an opportunity to have an authentic audience and have a public product?
When I teach like an apps class and students make apps, I didn't bring anyone in from outside, but we had I have an art class, like we share a door, it's connected. So we kind of had like a gallery walk is what I called it.
Yeah.
And like they all had their apps on the tablets, and then people walked around and left feedback on like a little form I had made.
So people had tablets?
Well, they make apps, so they had the apps they made up on the tablets, and then I had like a form next to it where everyone would go kind of have 2 or 3 minutes to look at the apps that other people had made and then give them feedback.
Great.
Good,
Julia.
I had my 8th graders create an invention, just something that would help the world, anything that would make their life easier, and they had to build a prototype, and then they had to make a commercial, and I have a green screen in my room, and they recorded their commercial and put a background on it. And then the other students later, after everyone's finished editing and all that, then they got to judge each other's projects, and it was just fun. It was something fun, and some of them came up with crazy things that would never probably exist, but it was just a fun prototype kind of problem-based learning.
Great, thank you.
I used to have a student who had an arm that was undeveloped from birth, and so we made prosthetic hands. And eventually we got to the point where I had them do like cardboard hands and strings and things, but we got to the point where we actually 3D printed the hand for him and brought his family in. And so not really a big audience, but certainly relevant and helpful. And I remember the kid grew so much during the year that we had to keep resizing it, and it was very difficult to get it to fit. So maybe some failure in that along the way, but it was certainly helpful and relevant for them. So they saw that.
That's super cool. Did the student like use the hand?
We practiced with it. He practiced picking up a bottle with it. And it was great, but it was just a real tight fit at that point. So we had to, it's hard to explain, but when you 3D print it, you also add foam inside it, so it's comfortable. Sure. And we didn't really account for that foam, causing it to be a smaller space. And so again, he was growing fast, and it made it a challenge. So we had to, I think once he moved on from that class, he moved into the middle school. I'm not sure what happened after that, but it was certainly a good try.
Definitely. Any other examples of having a student showcase of what they've done or what they've learned?
We do at the end of the year, we did a derby car race day. I had students actually draw up blueprints of what they thought they wanted to make. Again, it's precision machining, so they could use any tools in the shop that they were trained on
Mm-hmm.
to make a derby car. And so they developed a blueprint, and then they did like a process sheet. And then students and staff from around the school came and made judgments on craftsmen. And then we actually developed a bracket and raced, and it was a blast. Everybody that came down to the lab enjoyed it. I think students really took a lot of pride in their cars and their workmanship, and it was cool.
Absolutely. That's so neat. Thanks, Joe. So, a lot of times we do presentation of student learning in a real informal way. A lot of times we'll use a gallery walk. If you're at the point where you're not really using student presentations, like presentations of student learning, I think that there's a lot of lower stakes way that you can practice. So as you're working towards your PBL, and if you're going to create like an authentic presentation of student learning, let's brainstorm some ways that you might be able to give kids an opportunity to practice giving feedback to one another in like a lower stakes situation. Like, how do you right now give kids an opportunity to show what they've done?
Like super low stakes to me can just be things like letting them practice by making like screencastify assignments where they like share with each other. I mean, it's crazy low stakes, but they also get the chance to like see themselves and re-record themselves and like get their practice so that they can not be so freaked out.
Mm-hmm.
I have a TV in my room that I'm able to, when I have students make a project, if they're doing it digitally, I'm able to download it to a jump drive and then jump drive it to the TV. And so it plays continuously so that students get to see their work, but they also get to view the other students' works as well. And they really enjoy seeing their stuff up on the TV. It's like a big deal.
Mm-hmm. So in your classrooms right now, if you have a project, do you have a day or a class period where everyone stands up and says, I made this model of the solar system, blah, 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 right? And then they share their work. As you do that, what is the audience doing? Do they just wait for the next kid to go?
I mentioned yesterday the musical instrument project I did. I have the kids critique the kids that are doing the presentation. They have to give them one positive, one thing they're doing well, one thing they could improve on. And obviously sometimes, you get responses like good job and, stuff like that. But they do get some good feedback from that. Then the only people that see them are the kids that presented, and then everybody takes them over and gives it to them. But it's some additional feedback other than just my feedback to them.
That's absolutely right. Thanks, Dave. Janice, would you mind talking about what you do? Do you have audio right now?
I'm really having a hard time talking. I've been sick. But I don't mind trying. If I start coughing, I'll have to.
Okay. I'm sorry, didn't realize you were struggling.
Like a checklist, and my rubric there. And the kids have to give constructive criticism. They can't be hateful. And for high schoolers in 9th grade, sometimes that's pretty tough. They have to kind of check. They've got it for their own projects. And I think they know that since they've got to be up there too, they're not particularly, I forgot the video, they're not going to particularly be brutal, maybe because they think maybe somebody will be brutal to them when they have to get up. So I have really good luck with them giving constructive criticism. I'm pretty picky if I put them in a group. I try to really heterogeneously mix my groups. I don't let them pick very often if it's a group project. And sometimes even if it's an individual project, I'll set them in groups to work just so that they can give feedback that way all the time.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. I think, yeah, knowing that everyone's going to be under the gun at some point, they are a little bit kinder and more constructive, right?
I kind of do this. Oh.
Go ahead.
I kind of do the same thing when they have a project like mine did animal habitats toward the end of the year. Now we're first graders. And they had a checklist of what was required in their animal habitat. And then when they're presenting, the other people have to listen for those things. And then they give them feedback of what they liked, or if like they didn't have shelter, they could not just say, well, you didn't provide shelter. They would have to question them like, what's your animal going to do if it storms? And then they got them thinking about where they would go.
I think that's really good from the perspective of if kids are being graded against the rubric, it doesn't feel as arbitrary. You didn't get an A because I liked you better than I liked Susie. You met the checklist or you didn't.
Right.
And so it helps them see that. How does it work? Pretty well?
Mm-hmm. And a lot of times when they're presenting, they had it in their habitat. They just forgot to like mention it to the class. So then giving the other students that responsibility of listening and saying, what are they going to do for food? What do they do if they're thirsty? Where do they go? And then they were like, oh, I have the shelter. I just forgot to tell you. So.
Yeah. Well, it gives them a chance to like live in the design cycle and be like, oh yeah, that.
Right.
Great. I've seen teachers do presentation bingo, where you give everybody a bingo card, like things that you know you're going to hear from kids who use the design cycle. Everybody gets to check that part off, you know, or honestly, that feedback piece I think is really important. You could have kids also have a copy of the rubric and, you know, grade each person. Another thing I think is helpful when a student's done presenting is to use statements, questions, and explorations. So if you want to pick a couple of people to give statements, question, explorations, like statement, I liked how you used the pink in that graphic. Question, what do you think would happen if you did this? You know, or why did you do this? Or what were you thinking about that? Explorations, what would happen if you did, you know, that? So I think that that's another way to do it, but really modeling for students how to be a good audience member, how to give feedback, how to be engaged, so that they can be good, authentic audiences. The Ohio STEM Learning Network and the Tennessee STEM Innovation Network, actually, both networks put forth an annual student design challenge. Last year, everyone's design challenge was around infrastructure. It's open to any school, K-12, across the state. I'm not real sure what next year's topic is going to be, but it's like design challenge in a box, design thinking in a box, and the question's modifiable for grades K through 12. And so we ask teachers to lead students in an exploration about the topic. Last year, as I mentioned, was infrastructure. Some people did water quality as part of infrastructure. Some people did like reimagine community spaces, but students then had to do some research about the project, contact local experts, because remember, when we're doing all of this PBL, one of your best resources are the experts in your community. If you're doing something about how might we improve school safety, we can generate a list of who's interested in school safety. You know, we might call the police officer. We might call someone who's doing things with service animals, right? Because they help people like with their own safety in medical situations a lot of the time. And we can get those people to not only present at the beginning when you're doing your hook activity in your PBL, but they're usually thrilled to come back at the end to serve as your authentic audience, right? Because then they can have conversations with students about how they approach the solutions to a given problem. So don't forget that there are ways to incorporate people in your community to make the project more authentic and more relevant. And that's one of the reasons that we're sending you to a local manufacturer to create a level of authenticity and relevance for you as a learner as you're starting to unpack all this manufacturing stuff. All right, it's 10:41 right now. I think it's a good time to take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the engineering design process. We're going to break into small groups and look at some different versions of the engineering design process. We're going to say bless you to Dave.
Sorry.
That's all right. We'll
Thought
make
I
sure
was
that
muted.
that's all right. We'll make sure that everybody's good to go about homework, and we'll go from there. So let's take 9:42, 10:42. Let's take 10 minutes, and then we'll be back at 10:52. Okay. Thank you. We'll be coming back in just a minute. All right, it's 10:57. So can you all see my screen? Okay. It's not in a pretty format. Here we go. So we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about the engineering design process and design thinking. A show of hands, how many of you specifically teach the engineering your students? Okay. Maybe you teach and thinking to your students.
Heather, you're breaking up. I can't hear you.
Oh, and hang on, let me turn on headphones. One moment.
Can you hear me now?
Great. All right, so some of you do, some of you do not. We're going to spend a little bit of time talking about engineering design process and design thinking. And I have to tell you, I struggle. There's a lot of questions about Can you hear me?
Engineering design process and design thinking. Let me play with my volume. Sorry, I never usually have a problem. Both of them are ways to think about problems, right? Both of them are ways to work your way to the answer to a problem. And the big takeaway with the engineering design process is that there are so many models of the engineering design process and a lot of different words are used. So if you don't have a version of the design thinking or the engineering design process that you've adopted for your students, there are a number of resources available so that you can have some graphics to start to talk about this with your students, right? So you'll see on my screen now, you've got one that's geared towards early learners, very simple, ask what the problem is, imagine and brainstorm some solutions to the problem. Once you get, you brainstorm a bunch of ideas, you pick one, you make a plan, this is the solution that we're gonna implement. You can create a model of what you're going to try to do. Create the solution to the problem. A lot of times we ask students to make a physical prototype of their solution, or you could have them make a presentation, or you could have them do an infographic. There are a number of ways to illustrate or show what the solution to the problem is. Opportunity to get some feedback, improve the solution, make it better. And with the other versions, you get to communicate your solution. It's really important, gives students a lot of agency like we've talked about. So there's a number of different versions of the engineering design process. And if you haven't yet implemented the engineering design process with your students, there are a lot of videos. This deck that you have access to links to a BrainPop video. I couldn't get it to play because we don't have a subscription to BrainPop, but if you do, you can use it. One of the big takeaways is to find a version of the engineering design process that will resonate with your learners. And then when you're using the design process, like set some guidelines like we talked about, like when you give feedback to students, give them opportunities to speak positively to one another, use accountable talk in the context of working in groups with the design process, and then opportunity to pull in that growth mindset, right? Because the design process lends itself to growth mindset. We know that the cycle never ends and that there's always opportunities for further refining. And just because you didn't get to where you think you were going the first time, you have opportunities to keep getting there. Contrasting to, I'm not playing this video, you can watch it later. Contrasting EDP, there's also the Stanford model of design thinking. And the big difference with design thinking is that it starts with empathy. So I always think about how you might have a client that you're designing a solution for. And so you have to empathize with your audience and put yourself in their shoes to think about how a particular solution may or may not work for them. And then you work this cycle, right? I feel like it's difficult to differentiate this because I don't know, I think as a human, like you almost always first empathize. Like what's the reason that you're coming up with a solution? There's someone behind that problem. And so we give a chance for kids to tap into empathy. It's also another good tie-in to, social emotional development, right? We start with empathy. This is a problem. Who is the problem for? Why do they have this problem? How frequently do they experience the problem? And what can your solution do to make the problem be better? And we started thinking about the manufacturing process. Manufacturing process almost exclusively is, an opportunity for design thinking and problem solving. The reason that we have anything, Post-it notes, right, is because at some point people needed portable ways to record information. And oh, by the way, it's even better if it's sticky. And then think about when Post-it notes only look like this. And now you can find Post-it notes that are 1,000 different shapes and sizes and colors. And you can get them everywhere. And they're used in a number of different applications because things evolve over time. So we're going to spend some time breaking into small groups. I've made a very ugly, can you see my screen? I've made a very ugly, not aesthetically pleasing slide deck. We're going to break into groups, and each group's going to discuss how do you use EDP in your classroom. For those of you who do, for those of you who do not, you can just listen to the people that do. Do you have a version of EDP that you use or have formally adopted with your students? If that's a version that the group's like, yeah, put that on our slide. If not, Google a version of the EDP. The point of Googling this version, any versions of the EDP, is not so that we pick like the best one, but rather so that we build a collection of different versions so that later someone can go back through and say, oh, I like this one, okay? So right now we're just gathering different versions of the engineering design process. Pick one, put it on your slide. And then brainstorm together what's one way to introduce engineering design process to your students. Write that on your slide. You can also add more slides. So you'll see that each group only has one slide. You can right click and say new slide. And then now you can have 2 slides for your group. And then pick one. How do you move towards creating a culture of expecting and accepting the engineering design process? Like what's one technique that you can do to do more EDP in your classroom, do more design thinking in your classroom? Or an example of a lesson or a project activity to use with your students. Like, I think that all of those little STEM challenges are really good examples, right? You make a tinfoil boat. How many pennies or washers can you put on that tinfoil boat? What can you do to modify your design so that it can hold even more pennies or washers? Like those STEM challenges are great ways to start to explain engineering design process in a real safe, low stakes way to your students. So I'm going to break you guys into groups. Actually, I'm going to open up 5 breakout rooms and you're going to put yourselves in breakout rooms. I'm going to put the link to this slide deck in the chat. Everyone has access to it, and each group make a slide or 2 answering those questions. Does that make sense? Does 20 minutes feel like the right amount of time to get this done? Because you're going to have discussion and you're going to make your presentation. And we're going to come back and report out pretty quickly. And then we'll be done. Okay? After we talk about what's due for tonight. So I'm going to open up breakout rooms and put this link in the chat. You can still see chat after you go away, right? Yeah, okay, just making sure. There's the Google Doc. And more breakout rooms. I'm going to make 5. I'm going to manually assign, and y'all are going to go. Ready? Thanks. I'll probably be around to check on you. 20 minutes, all right? Come on, it's not going. Okay, well, I'm just going to manually assign. Travis, do you see where it says breakout rooms? I can't hear you, you're on mute. How'd we do, guys? Cool. There's something really satisfying to me about watching everybody come back. It's like time travel. I don't know why I like it. All right. Well, you guys made a pretty robust slide deck in 20 minutes. That's awesome. I hope you had some good conversations, and we're going to spend a little bit of time sharing out. I got to pop into all the rooms, and it was really neat to hear you guys talking about some good ideas to share with each other. I also like that we now have a whole bunch of versions of the engineering design process for people to consider using with their students, if that's something that you want to move towards with your kids. Okie doke. Can see my screen, right? Cool. And if you didn't get to something because you were having such a great conversation, that's okay. Just present what you would like to present. Group one, do we have a presenter?
I'll if,
Thanks,
if
Sarah.
nobody else wants to. So this is my engineering design process graphic that I use for my freshman science class. I picked this one for my freshman science because it is pretty simple. And when we talk about this, it's in my first unit that is all about just kind of scientific inquiry and being curious and how we ask questions and that sort of thing. And so we really spend a lot of time talking about the difference between the engineering design process and the scientific method. So I use this kind of cyclical graphic because it shows them that a little bit different than the scientific method, the engineering design process is a constant, kind of a constant cycle. So at any one of those steps, as they're moving through the design process, if they see an error or they see something that they can improve upon, they can go back and they can, do some more research or make some adjustments and then continue on in the design process. And so there's really not so much an ending to the engineering design process like there is a little bit more of in the scientific method. So that's why I picked that graphic. And then we talked about in that third question, as we walk through the graphic, most of the time I like to pick a specific product that we talk about and kind of go through, well, how are we going to make this product? Why do you think they did it this way? And what adjustments did they make and that sort of thing. And then somebody else in our group said that one of the products that they like to use when they talk about this is a pencil, because usually all the kids have a pencil in their hand. They talk about, why is the pencil the way it is? Why is it that length? Why is the eraser that size? They try to make the pencil so that when the length is, almost gone, so is the eraser, and they're supposed to end at the same time. And why does it have that kind of hexagon shape? Well, it's to help people grip. While that works for most people, it doesn't work for some. So what are some of the adaptations people have added? The caps that we can put on the erasers, the different grippers that you can get for younger students when they're learning how to hold a pencil, and those kind of things and adjustments that people have made, and how it's changed as the years have gone. Way back when we had just the wooden pencils, now we have all these mechanical pencils, and there's all different shapes and sizes and all that stuff. So using a specific example and kind of working through how scientists have come up with those different adaptations and why is a big part of how we decided that we would introduce it. And then we chose to answer the question about how to adopt a culture of using the engineering design process. And we said the two biggest things are we need to give students the opportunity to improve and adapt their design. We can't say, here's your project, and they make, you know, one design and they turn it in and we say, that's not very good, you get a C. We need to say, okay, here's your product. It's got these issues, you know, it doesn't work perfectly. What could you do to make it better? We need to give it back to them and provide them with time to make those adjustments, you know, and then do just that constant cycle over and over until they have a product that they feel is the best product, and they're happy with it. And then one of the other people in my group said that they teach younger students, and a lot of the time those students will try one design and they'll say, I'm done. And my high school kids will do that as well, because if I give them a week to work on it and they can finish it in a day, you know, sometimes they would rather be done and just sit and do nothing. Well, we can't allow them to just say, I'm done. There's always something that you can do to make it better, or an adjustment you can make. We should never just say, I'm done after one try, because, you know, even the smartest people usually don't have the best work on the very first try. So just giving them that time to improve their work and encouraging them to continue to make those adjustments when they think they, you know, are done, all done.
Sarah, thank you so much for being our first presenter.
Yeah.
I love the pencil example because it's a really great way to get kids thinking through the EDP. I was in some sort of training where they gave everyone a pen and you had to generate like as many different uses of the pen as possible. So that, you know, started like helping people like practice brainstorming and thinking about things in new ways. So this is another version of that I like a lot. I'm asking for 2 to 3 people to give comments, feedback, thoughts, observations, ask questions, talk to Sarah about what else she told you.
I think that the biggest problem we have is what you're talking about is time, because we do have such time constraints within our classroom, and giving them that extra time they need to improve upon that product.
I second that as well. I have trouble with giving them the opportunities to rebuild or redesign their prototypes that they have. Sometimes they get to, but most of the times they don't. But I will always ask them, what would they do? What could they do better? Or what would they do different to their projects? And they've learned that by looking at, when you talk about presentations, they'll present their projects and they get ideas from others that they could do this, they would do this differently if they had the extra time to do so.
I really like pointing out this, like, no saying I'm done. It's a thing in writing too, that's writing is a process, not a product. And I think just like really reinforcing the idea of process, which kids are just constantly like, what grade did I get in that? I turned it in, I'm done. So I think that that's super crazy important to kind of like have it be process and help them understand they are never done with process. So I like that a lot.
Thank you. Let's move to group 2, please.
We kind of talked about hitting on all levels. In our design process, we tried to keep it somewhat simple, with it being numbered, you know, like for elementary kids on the way up, maybe too simple for maybe a high school level, but you know, ask, imagine, plan, create, test, improve, share. And what we talked about is you know, one way we could introduce this would be a couple of different ways. We could talk about it in class, about how we would develop something and how we have to figure out, okay, what's the problem in the first place? What do we need to do? And then we kind of talked about a project that, you know, I think a lot of people might use would be like an egg drop. And if you had to do an egg drop, and you can put all different stipulations on it, depending on grade level and this and that, you know, maybe for a lower grade, that could be the egg doesn't have to break. As you move up, it could be you have to introduce more drag. It has to drop whoever really slow, plus the egg can't break. And then you can throw more stipulations on it, like the whole thing can't weigh more than X number of grams or something like that, to where they really have to scratch your heads. And as you introduce the project, you know, you leave it pretty wide open. And, you know, Brain Pop has some different videos. I'm kind of a Brain Pop guy. The kids seem to really attach to Tim and Moby, but the one, when I do it, I show where, you know, they're talking about the parachute, they talk about acceleration, they talk about drag, and, you know, and I kind of go through that. But when we kick it off, then the kids, it's sky's the limit, you know. And I do put a weight thing on it, to where the whole package outside, not including the egg, cannot weigh more than 90 grams. Well, that's about the weight of a small calculator, and they really have to start scrambling to be able to put something together with those stipulations on it. They have to come up with have to imagine it in the first place. And of course, first thing they do, they start grabbing Walmart bags, and then they start, you know, well, that didn't work, you know, as they plan it and create it and then test. But, you know, that's one way of getting through all that. And you know, like we said, talked about, you could have different parameters, different stipulations, depending on grade level and how far you want to go with that. And then we talked about where, I think one of the schools, they bring the fire trucks out, and they drop, you know, from the ladder truck, they drop them. So you're getting community involvement and stuff like that, you know, also with that. But that's kind of the direction we went. If you guys want to add anything to that, team two. Alan, give me a big thumbs up. I ain't saying nothing. Okay.
Thanks, Dave. Any comments or feedback for Dave? I'd like at least 2 people to say something.
I like that graphic, especially with the numbers, because I think sometimes you can refer back to it to some kids. Look at number 3. What is that? I really like that graphic.
Do y'all think that having numbers, and the numbers go from small to big and then the numbers stop, makes it feel like less of a continuous cycle? Like, that's my hesitation about the one with the numbers, but I understand for communication purposes, like, look at step 3 makes a lot of sense.
I think you'd have to point out that those are arrows going.
It's still a circle. Yeah.
Around.
Yeah.
Well, you can compare it to a clock too. Clock goes around.
That's true.
And you can always go from 5 to 3, you know, and I think you do need to emphasize that and probably remind the kids. They are tending to go, you know, they want the steps laid out for them and they want to get done with it. And I think we would have to just, as a guide, as a coach, as, you know, the facilitator, is to remind them that they really do need to revisit the steps.
I like the fact that it's color coded, because then you could, if you did want to get rid of the numbers, you could just go with the colors and point out where the colors are at. I think I remember maybe in some of the reading that we did that some people have upped the stakes on that egg drop and gone with phones. The kids have to put their own phones into the apparatus that they drop.
I love that. I love that. That's a great idea.
That feels like a liability nightmare.
You can have them sign off on it. I've seen them do worse with the phone. I've seen kids drop kick their phone just to show that they won't break.
As far as the cycle and stuff like that, once they get to the test and prove, I've seen some teams actually scrap their whole plan. It's like that, this isn't working. So they got to go back to the beginning and start all over. That happens more often than what you think. Like I said, they see one person grab a Walmart bag and they're like, oh, we're all doing Walmart bags, you know, and they find out real quick, that's probably not the best idea. So I think even though there are numbers or the color coded, you know, once they get to that testing and improving, sometimes they have to go all the way back to planning or creating and you know, redoing the whole project.
You could also use those numbers as reference when they get to step 5. If something fails, ask them which step you think you need to go back to and start with first.
And I think along with test 5, if it's not working, why? Why is it not working? And okay, then you get into, okay, well, if it's not working, what can I do to improve it? So I guess it is, you know, that it's that vicious cycle of, you know, test, improve, create, redesign, re-engineer it, you know, that type of stuff.
Yep. Does anyone in here have their kids, if you use the EDP, have their kids reflect in writing through each step? You know, so like write down all the stuff that they brainstorm and then create their diagram or create some sort of thing and then go through it, but also do reflection. I think that's a nice way to get some writing in there and also get them to have that process become more familiar and more.
It's certainly helpful, but I think time gets to be of the essence in that too. That's where I have to cut corners sometimes.
Mm-hmm. For those of you that do have kids write along the way, what do you use for them to do that? What's your format that you use?
My kids have an engineering notebook, and we learn how to keep up with an engineering notebook so that they will have the process in there. So I will see their thought processes, the questions that they may have about the project, and their thought process that began before they began to build their project or whatever it might be. And then that was their references to go back to making adjustments or rebuilding or polishing up a few things here and there.
And Cheryl, how old are your kids?
Mine are freshmen through, most of mine are freshmen, sophomores, and juniors.
Awesome, thank you. All right, group 3.
You'll have to excuse me. I've got puppies that are going crazy here, but I'll just kind of kick us off a little bit. I threw the graphic in there because I got this graphic from the Ohio State University Engineering Department and some work I did there. And other folks in the group sort of mentioned that they use very similar graphics, although several in our group were elementary. And so they just said, you know, sort of scale things back and make language a little bit simpler with the younger groups. And but what we liked, and I think was coming up in that conversation of that last graphic, is that although this sort of looks linear when you look across the top of it, you want to make sure you have that conversation with students that there's those arrows that drop down and are two-way arrows. And so kind of reinforces this idea that you're not just moving left to right across this, you're stopping, you're reevaluating, you're going back to the drawing board. And that's part of the process. And in our later questions here, where we talk about that, what do we expect and accept, and how do we build trust in our students that, you know, that it's okay to kind of scrap something and go back, because sometimes our students that are the A-minded students, they think it's all just based on the final design, but we have to build rubrics, or we have to build in this culture that as long as you are working through the process and you are validating what you're doing, you're documenting, like you just mentioned, you're writing things, you're drawing things, it goes back to that notebook kind of idea too, of like you're showing the evidence that you've been doing the work, and that's the bigger part of the rubric. Oh, I'm an escape artist trying to go here. Then kids can buy into this a little easier. If someone else wants to speak, especially to those of you who teach the younger groups, you had some really valuable things.
Jennifer, I just have to comment on the Charlie Harper art behind you. I think that's really super cool. My dad knew him in Cincinnati.
Did he? Oh, well, I'm in Cincinnati, so I love Charlie Harper. And
it's great stuff.
Yeah, thanks.
Just speaking a little bit for the younger kids, we tend to use layman's terms. We tend to bring it down a lot for them, so they understand things like try and try again. They understand things like when you say, "Hey, is it okay to make a mistake?" And they'll reply yes. And then what do we do when we have a problem or whatnot? We keep trying. And then it really helps them to understand, like, as teachers, when we make mistakes, pointing out the mistakes that we're making. And then what did we do? We kept going. We kept trying. And so that helps them a lot. But what we found is with the younger students, we're doing a lot of the skills to help the upper level teachers to be able to do some of these activities. We talk a lot about kids being able to come in and just tear tape, and being able to cut, and being able to work collaboratively together, so that as they get older, they're able to do more of this in an in-depth process. So.
Thanks. What about these activities that are linked here? Do you guys want to tell us what those are?
Okay, so I linked those top two, the Boom Bridge activity, which is one that I use at my high school level for sophomores through seniors. That's a little more in depth. There's some math behind it. The biggest thing I find for that project, I have people of all different levels. So, but the Boom Bridge activity, pretty much, I introduced the problem. They have to make a boom span over a certain amount. Now, I do have some specific requirements on it, but for the most part, the kids are kind of open to design them how they would like. That one, like I said, took a little longer. That's like a 2-week project. And then the second one is the geodesic dome. It's a little more streamlined. There's a couple other intro activities I had them do, but they're creating a dome that can hold as much weight as possible. So it's the most, they liked it the most. And the one group that actually won the challenge, I call them all challenges, and we try to grade them based on who wins. And there's usually strict criteria for winning, but the geodesic dome one it actually ended up holding 405 pounds. And when they win, I put their picture up on the wall, and they think it's so cool.
We do in kindergarten, we introduce nursery rhymes. So we have a challenge called Huff and Puff, where the kids are split into groups, and they get to make a house made out of sticks and straw, and then they use Legos for the bricks. And then they construct it, and then it's put in front of a big fan. And can it stand the Huff and Puff of the big bad wolf? And then they get to retry. If it didn't withstand the wind, they get to go back and do a rebuild. And then in kindergarten, I actually have the kids build kites from scratch. And here we have book buddies. So it's their 5th grade book buddy comes, and they take them out and they help them fly the kite. And we take the supplies out with us. So they kind of on the fly make adjustments as needed to try to see if they can get their kite in the air. So.
That sounds like a fun day.
It is.
Yeah. Cool. Any reflections for group 3? I really like the whole notion of using a rubric and making the process be a huge part of the rubric. I think that that's another way where you reinforce that idea of culture around, we're designers. or engineers or whatever. I think the other thing that I've seen people use is that whole idea, like, how can we think like an engineer, and knowing what an engineer does, and then you can build in some career awareness stuff. But really that whole idea of STEM identity, self-efficacy, all of those things, so that kids can really begin to buy into the fact that they too are problem solvers. Nancy, I think it was Nancy. Who's talking about row, row, row your boat? And drawing.
That was me.
Cheryl, will you tell everybody about that? Because that was my favorite thing that I heard when I was eavesdropping on everybody.
Oh, so a lot of times when we first start off, they say we can't draw. So what I do is they all have a dry erase board. They're in a circle, and we we sing the song, Row, Row, Row Your Boat, and it's broken down in phrases. And as we hit each phrase, at that moment, you say, row, row, row your boat. While we're saying that, they're drawing a boat. They have to stop and pass the board to the right. And we keep singing the song, and they have to add to the picture that is on the board in front of them. And it just keeps rotating around, and it's just random how long I sing the song, and they get crazy, the boards get all messed up. But at the end, when we evaluate, we have everybody show their boards. There's whales, there's fish, there's all different kinds of things that they'll put on there with those boats because they don't know what else to add. But we identify, do you see a boat in this picture? And most of the time the answer is yes. So you cannot tell me that you cannot draw, is what I'm trying to get to them. So it doesn't matter, because that's a lot of their prep work, is to draw something, the object that they're going to build first, because it helps with the time constraint of building that object. If they see it, then they can know what parts and how much materials and things they need for those projects. It's one of the design thinking role playing that we do, or not role playing. It's a design thinking process.
Well, I was just going to say really quick, back up to that last group. I loved the it's okay to mess up. I think making sure that students know that failure can be successful is really important, especially in the engineering design process.
Absolutely. Thank you. All right, group 4.
Well, I'm not sure if they want me to go or not, but I will go ahead and say, since we're short on time, that I start this process with introducing, and I think I got this from Teach Engineering, what is engineering and the types of engineers. And then we go into just naming things in the classroom that have been engineered. And sooner or later, someone will say our tables, our science tables. And then I ask them make the table better. And so they're just discussing it. Oh, well, we could make the top, dry erase, or we could make it on wheels or such as that, because they're very heavy. So we just discuss how we could make it better. And then we go into a week-long process of design challenges, and intertwined with that, I teach engineering disasters and ethics. Because I think that's engineering ethics is really important for me to talk to them about engineering ethics, and for them to understand the importance that ethics plays in the job, in engineers' jobs. And so we start with the easy challenges, and they form a team, and they keep that same team all week, because they need to be able to collaborate together and see strengths and weaknesses of each other. They start with something a really simple design challenge. And then it gets a little harder. The next day, their resources, their supplies gets harder to build with, but they have this challenge is the same. And then I introduce limitations, stop the group at certain times, and introduce the limitation of, you've had a cutback, you can only use one hand. You've gone globally, you can't speak the language, you can't talk. So some of those put some, and in this process, they have already gone through the engineering design process in a graphic organizer, and they have to reflect after each activity on at what point in the challenge were they at brainstorming? At what point were they creating? Finally, they build up to their hardest challenge, which we've all done, the spaghetti and string and tape and one marshmallow on the top challenge, which would have, made them quit school if I would have given it to them at the beginning of the week. But we do it on Friday at the very end of the process. And that at that point, they've worked together so long and gone through the process so many times. That's really amazing what they do create. The biggest thing is to have them reflect and go through the process and look at each thing and tell where they were and what they did if they had a disaster, how they went back, what went wrong, what went right, what would they do next time if I gave them the same exact materials. They always want to do it again because they have all these new ideas. The bad thing about it is I've been doing this at the end of the year. I really have no idea why, because I need to do it at the beginning of the year. I do start off with the Honda and Dodge Dart commercials. They have some great commercials on YouTube about the engineering design process. So that's it.
Thanks so much, Deb. Any other comments from group 4?
I think we keep talking about it's okay to fail, and I have a 3D printer, so I only have one, so we don't run it full time, but the kids are always so upset when something messes up, and I'm always going, oh my goodness, this is the best thing, because now we can look at it and see how can we fix it, what can we do to redesign it, and the kids always want to touch and pick them up. No, they drop them and break them a lot of times, but still they think they're in trouble because they've messed up on a 3D print. And I'm like, no, this is beautiful. And they'll say, well, we need to throw that one away. No, we need to keep that one so we can look and learn. So I love failure in my room.
Thanks, Terry. That's a good thing to model to kids. Okie doke. Let's move on to group 5. Who's our group 5 person?
So I think I was elected. So I think I'm trying to remember. Okay, so the design process is the same as other ones that I've seen. It's just kind of cutesier with the kids. And a lot of this stuff is like almost repeat of what others have been saying. Although Devin added this crash course link that she said was a good example for people to look at. We didn't watch it as a group, so I don't know if Devin, if you want to explain what's in that.
Yeah, it just really works through the engineering design process step by step to break down as an explanation for the kids to understand how each step builds into the next and how it's interchangeable with other steps and how you can always go back to. I love Crash Course. It's on YouTube if anybody ever wants to check into it. They've got just about every topic that you could think of, but I really love to just kind of as a refresher, because I'm 6th grade, so usually elementary has, already touched into the EDP process. And so this is a good way to just set it as a reminder and also keeps the kids engaged.
And we talked about in terms of getting the kids introduced to EDP is just to sort of start, small with a culmination of things. And like Cheryl was good with a lot of examples. Some already have been mentioned, like making the little car with the egg in it, or different things with the egg in it that they need to do, or like building a marshmallow tower for collaboration. I was thinking, and this is, I think, from doing the module about like a problem in manufacturing is that there are so many parts. So say like my husband worked for a company where they have to ship out machines, and there's always a problem getting the machine out on time because there are so many moving parts and so many different people, and things have to be coordinated and organized really well. So I was like, what if we took something like the, marshmallow and spaghetti tower, but instead had different groups doing different parts of a whole. And then I gave them a task, like you need to deliver 10 of these dolls but you all have different parts you have to put together in small groups to my desk by the end of the bell, and have them fail, like let them fail at it, right? And then the next day, okay, how do you need to streamline these processes? How do you have to communicate? This is the problem, like as an example. And we just talked about if we're doing hands-on activities to represent the problems, to get them collaborating, obviously make sure that those things are unintimidating and accessible and fun. And Cheryl was good about talking about just repeating and repeating, just have a repetitiveness to the process and use it in different things in different ways until they get used to it. So that was ours.
Thank you so much, Teresa. That made me think of a school that I heard of recently who they got their kids to reimagine how kids move through the lunch line because their process was bumpy. And so I wonder if you just look around your school and ask your kids, like, what annoys you about school, aside from, having to come every day, but, what are things that don't work as well as they should? And get them to start to think about, like, the way that we change classes is annoying, or getting to my locker is too far away. I'm sure that there are a million thousand things.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
You just made me think of like a kind of a common thing in writing to assign to students now is an autoethnography. I don't know if people have heard of an autoethnography, but it's like a deep dive analysis of something in your life. And usually, like when I assign it, it's like of a culture. So like, is there a culture to getting on the bus? Like, do you not sit in someone else's seat? And what does it mean if you do, and why do people want to sit in the back of the bus versus this? And is it appropriate to chew your gum really loud or to play, like what are all these little things? But I think like that to me could be part of the ask or the empathy, like a deep dive analysis of like a single thing that, that you want to deal with, sort of works along an autoethnography that has artifacts and you sort of analyze it from this distance.
I love that. Okay. Any other final thoughts or comments?
I do like the image that was selected for here. I think with the littles, they would get this pretty easy. They can clearly see, especially if you go through it once with them, they could get it, which I like. It's very simplified for them.
Also diversity.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Here's a problem that I just came up with that I want us to think through solving super quick. So we're going to do on the fly. So here's the problem. You guys all know so much stuff. That's not a problem. That's an awesome thing. But I know that sharing resources is super helpful, like this engineering process crash course kids 12.2. How might we take our collective wisdom and put it down somewhere so that everybody has, when they walk away from this class, a list of airtight resources that they can use in their classroom? What are some ways we might be able to collect some wisdom from this group, like store a bunch of links or give people access to different things or lessons that we might have used that we want to share with folks? Can we come up with some ideas about how we might do that efficiently without too much work, but in a way that's useful?
I saw somebody put Google Drive, maybe a shared doc in that Drive folder that's already shared with us.
What if we just continued using this document here and add slides since it's shared with everybody already in Google?
I picture like a Google Doc with a table where you put links in to things. I have a hard time sometimes if we slide through a whole bunch of slides, I feel like, I guess you have to have access to the Google doc through Drive or something somehow, but sometimes I have problems getting into Drives because of being like on the wrong Google account or trying to find where that was. So if there were just like a link to a Google Doc that was that would be streamlined for, I think,
Would a Padlet be too confusing or better or worse or possible?
A Padlet's cool because you can pull stuff into different categories. So things that relate to EDP, you can shove them over there. Things that, you know, you can just post a bunch of links.
I feel like it's a little more visual too, for me. I like that.
Okay. We're going to think on this a little bit more, but an additional request for tonight or for this afternoon, please pull together 3 to 5 of your favorite resources. Just the link and maybe like a 1-sentence description so that we can add. Don't put them anywhere yet. We'll have another like little quick round of brainstorm about how we want to like collect it all. But so for today, 3 to 5 resources with like a 1-sentence description about, I like this for EDP. This is a good lab, whatever it is. Because I think that that would be nice to have. So 3 to 5 resources. You're going to do module 2 tonight, this afternoon, if you haven't already. We're going to be here tomorrow. Tomorrow we have a manufacturing panel that's pretty fun. That'll be a good chunk of our time tomorrow. And we're going to add to our question parking lot if anybody has anything to add. If you don't have anything to add, just put your name in it and say no questions. I'm going to put that in the chat. Any other questions or anything for today? Cool. Question parking lots, and then think of your 3 to 5 resources. All right. Thanks, everybody. Oh, hold on. I get to give you the link. There you go. Question parking lot. Put your stuff under the black line if you don't mind. And once you have that open, you can go ahead and leave. Hope everybody has a great afternoon. Someone please go to the pool.
Hey, Heather, can I just ask you an individual question real fast?
Uh-huh.
So I'm just kind of a little worried about the fact that it's due September 30th. So my school doesn't start back until September 6th. So I was just like breaking down the weeks. So September 6th, that first week, the first 4 days would just be like, obviously like introductory, things like that. And then, so the 30th, is that when everything's due? Like the survey, just, I'm assuming everything's due by the 30th at the latest.
Yeah, let me talk with Kristen about any sort of latitude that we have. I'm not sure that there is any. So let me have like a very specific focused question with Kristen and Sandy about how to manage that. Okay.
Okay, because yeah, I'm like, wow, am I on a time constraint? So
Yeah.
I mean, I'll make it work, but I just don't know.
Of course you will.
It'll be the longest PBL. It'll probably more be like a fun introduction. I don't know. My mind's just kind of going everywhere with the time constraints. So
yeah, no, I get it.
That's my worry. So okay, well, thank you.
Sorry, I don't have a better answer, but I don't want to make something up.
No, it's okay. No, thank you. I appreciate it. All right, have a good day.
Thanks, you too.
Heather, I wanted to ask about if you had any more information on that placement yet.
Remind me where you're placed, Travis.
Somewhere in Miamisburg.
Oh, no, I haven't heard back from them yet. I'll talk to them.
Okay. My wife is due with a baby towards the end of July. So I was hoping to not have to do that like on the same, you know what I mean?
I get it.
I was hoping to get it knocked out before the baby's due, if possible.
Okie doke. I will see. Like all I can do is ask, right?
Right. I know.
I've done that. And So I will push some more and see what I can come up with,
All
okay?
right, thank you.
Rob, where are you placed?
It was in Sandusky, Ohio, if that helps. I gotta look at the email.
P something. Do you guys want to see what it looks like inside my brain?
JBT.
See this? Have you ever used my maps? It's my favorite thing for placing teachers. So then I say, okay, these guys are businesses. And then I say, how far are they to the person? Am I within my 30 miles? Oh my gosh. So if you ever need to match a bunch of teachers within 30 miles of their location, I strongly recommend my maps. Remember we talked about waiting until like Wednesday?
Yep.
To reach out. So we'll still wait till Wednesday to reach out. And if you don't hear from them tomorrow, say, hi, I'm supposed to be with you. Can I come play with you? And they'll say, sure. Every business that I sent a match email to wrote to me within the last week and said, yep, we're still in. Awesome. Any other questions, you guys? Okie doke. Thank you so much.